This week, we're going to be talking with Ryan Lortie and Baptiste about GNOME on BSD. Upstream development is finally treating the BSDs as first-class citizens, so we'll hear about how recent porting efforts have been since. BSD Gnow, episode 99, recorded July 22nd, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week. And I know, yes, I did mispronounce the name of the show a little bit. It'll make sense when we get to the interview, I promise. But we'll have to wait until we get to that point and tease you a little bit there. But we do have some news to get into first. So first up this week, we got some OpenBSD news, a new utility, or a new, whole subsystem called Tame is what we're going to be talking about here, which is written by Nicholas Marriott. And Theo Durat actually sent out an email detailing a whole bunch about it, about what it does and how it's able to use to restrict what a process can and can't do, which is very intriguing.
Yeah, so Tame is basically a system call you would put in your program to lock it down. So in general, the way systems like this have worked is either you have something like Capsicum, where you rewrite your program around, in Capsicum, and you do the privilege things you need to do, and then you drop your privileges very specifically, and then you get into the main loop of your program where you do whatever it is you got to do. Or there's more generic ones like what OpenBSD has before, which was systrace, which just said you can never do this operation. But it's like, well, in order for my program to work, I need to do that operation. But after this point in my program, after this point in my program, I never wanted that to be able to happen again. And that's what Tame provides. So it's kind of like Capsicum, but designed to be easier to implement by basically just having a couple of big classes of things you can do, rather than being down and being like, you can only deal with the FDs you've already opened, or you have to work inside this, basically designed to make it so that when you're converting a program to be sandboxed, it won't take as much code or as much time.
Sure. A little bit quicker to prototype and get this into production then. But yeah, definitely interesting. So they have a bunch of different initial categories of operation that you can work on here, including computation, memory management, read-write operations on file descriptors, of course, opening files, that's pretty standard, and networking, because who doesn't want networking support in that? So, of course, restrictions can also be stacked even further into the lifespan of the process, but then removed abilities can never be regained, obviously for security reasons. So definitely an interesting thing. I'm looking through the...
so they have a list of 29 programs they've already started adding Tame to, including CAT, PAX, which is an archiver, PS, dmessage, ping and ping 6. Ping, sure, it needs to access the network, but it should never access a file, right? DC, diff, finger, from, ID, kdump, logger, script, sed, signify, unique, wc, whois, arp, authpf, bgpd, httpd, ntpd, relayd, syslogd, tcbdump, and traceroute.
That's really cool. Yeah, and he says here not all these are necessarily perfect yet, but it shows the trend. So this is getting put in pretty quick since the changes are fairly simple. Of course, non-network programs being the simplest to get working
you could just be like, no network for you.
Yeah, you have no network. So there you go. Or in the case of, like you said, a network program, no file access for you. There you go. Done. So definitely really cool. And we have links to the email where they're talking about this on the mailing list, which includes the man page. So if you want to read through some of the nitty-gritty on how it works, that's definitely be a good starting place for you. And looks like this is an initial work in progress version of Tame, so there may be some improvements. We got some links to other mailing list posts here, including some more options talking about being added before it hits release. Talking about some very specific access policies can sometimes backfire, however. Take a look at that.
There was some interesting one looking.
Oh, it's
that's a long post.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pointed out early in the code, looking at it, that the way it dealt with allowing you to access /tmp was by just doing a stir comp against the incoming path and seeing if it started with /tmp. And then it was obviously pointed out, well, someone could do /tmp/... / something and escape the sandbox. And it's like, oh, right, we'll have to deal with that. And then, once you deal with it, and then it's like, oh, but they could also put a symlink in /tmp to point somewhere else. And it's like, oh, right. So, this stuff gets really complicated really quickly. And, it'll be interesting to see if by the time Tame gets further along, if it ends up looking more like Capsicum, because it turns out it's not that easy to lock down programs.
Sure. As you start coding in more and more cases and edge cases.
Yeah, and it's like maybe we can't quite be as broad-grained as we had hoped.
Well, we'll see. That's definitely interesting to follow. And we got a gazillion links here. You can read all about it, including some further discussion links, Reddit links. There's some stuff
OpenBSD Journal,
and News,
Hacker News, and Reddit, and so on.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely this is spurring a lot of conversation about this whole new Tame system. It looks like kernel bits are in the tree now, and the userland changes are just starting to trickle in as well. So you should see that here in your upcoming pulls of the latest OpenBSD.
Yes, I think it'll be good to see more and more user-land applications actually getting sandbox, whether it's with Tame or Capsicum.
Cool. Okay, well, next up we have some Docker information on FreeBSD. A new wiki page has landed. I think Michael Dexter has been the primary driving force behind this one. But this is he sent this to us a little bit earlier in the week. And, of course, with the experimental Docker port landing in FreeBSD a few weeks ago, now we're starting to get some documentation around that. So one of the things we got to mention, there's been a little bit of confusion that I've seen, is that, first of all, this Docker is the real Docker, a real thing. It's not using some virtual machine in the back end. In other words, it's not bringing up VirtualBox to do Linux simulation. And since it's not doing that, it does have some limitations.
Yeah,
the wiki page.
It's using the recently landed 64-bit Linux emulation compatibility layer that's part of the FreeBSD kernel now. So it's emulating a slightly older Linux kernel than some people might expect. So there's a couple things that, certain things you might install in the Docker might not work quite as you expect because, there's no iNotify system call yet.
And you'll see various warnings when you run Linux commands like, hey, my kernel version is really old or something. But a lot of this is well documented in this wiki article now. And it's, of course, using all the Linux compat ABI stuff, which means you'll need to be on 11 current, a pretty recent one if you want to try the 64-bit Linux
basically
stuff.
Be on 11 current from this month in order for it to work. There's somebody's looking today at porting or merging the Linux emulation stuff back to 10 stable so that we can have it in time for 10.2, but it's already kind of late in the release process. And aren't
we already at RC1?
Well, no, RC1's a couple.
Okay.
If we have a beta 3, it'll be this Friday, and if not, RC1 will be next Friday.
Okay, so that's. But
we're already past the betas, so. If it can't be merged today, I'm guessing we won't be able to have that for 10.2. But, I kind of wanted to get more testing too. But then again, if the Linux 64-bit support is kind of broken, that's not really going to kill the release either. The release still works.
Well, because you're not breaking something that worked before. We just didn't have it before.
Well,
you went from no implementation to a slightly broken one.
There were changes in the 32-bit Linux compat, so it's like
iffy, gray area. I'll just push it in. Be done with it.
That's what I'm hoping, but I'm not the one that will get yelled at if it doesn't work, so I can understand from both sides.
Well, speaking of this Docker thing, though, if you are on FreeBSD 10.x, don't despair. You can still actually play with this port. So the wiki talks about there's a FreeBSD container image available as well, which pretty much means it's a jail at this point. Docker is using all the jail subsystem to spin up its containers. So I've done that on my PCBSD 10.1 box, for example. I've installed Docker and then pulled the FreeBSD container down, was able to play with that just like I would a jail, which is just a kind of a neat way if you want to experiment with the Docker command and get some familiarity with it. So of course, give it a try. Let us know how you find it to be comparable to other solutions and how well it works on BSD for you.
The big thing here is this is actually the original Docker client pointed to BSD, so it means that people that have already learned Docker on Linux, you can just give them FreeBSD as their host machine, and it'll still just work.
Yep. Yeah. No new surprises. It's same command, same syntax, same everything. Okay. Well, next up, we have some more OpenBSD news, and this one's kind of interesting here. So they've removed sudo in favor of doas.
Yes.
So, of course, OpenBSD's included sudo for many, many years now, and the current maintainer of sudo, Todd Miller, is also a longtime OpenBSD dev. So the version included in the base system is much smaller than the latest current version used elsewhere, but was based on older code.
Yes.
So after some internal discussion, it looks like they made the decision that sudo should be moved to ports, where now it can be a little more easily updated and offer extra features that were missing in base, like LDAP support and whatnot, which I can understand that. We build with all those options on as well.
And
that's stuff you don't necessarily want in base.
So basically they ended up forking sudo and having that older version in their base system, and the newer version had grown so much, like, well, we didn't really want to pull in all that code and re-audit it and everything. So they're like, well, if we just rewrote the very basic of what we needed, and if you need the full sudo, you can install it from the package.
Yeah,
it's like, it turns out our doas utility is like 350 lines of code versus the 10,000 in the old sudo versus, more than that in the new sudo.
That just makes sense. There's a lot of things like that where it's like, it doesn't really need to be in the base, and we have a good enough utility there. And it's not like it's pretty low-hanging fruit to say just go ahead and package install something these days, or install the port even. Not very difficult. So it looks like after the initial import happened, though, a number of developers began reviewing and already improving various bits. And we have links to some of the code you can check out now if you'd like to see what it looks like. The command usage and config syntax does seem pretty straightforward, so that's really good. And, of course, we have links to some more of the discussion here as well. So any examples on the command syntax? I see 3 flags here.
Yeah.
You got config -s for shell and -u for user. That's pretty darn simple.
You don't get much from it, but that's all you, in most cases, is all you actually need, right? Is enough to get that bit done. And if you actually want to do sudo, you should probably buy Michael Lucas's book, learn how to do it properly, and then go ahead and do it.
That's right. Yeah, even the comp files, I think the man page is a page and a half. So yeah, it's definitely
versus
a lot more
the comp
streamlined.
file and the man page for sudo are much bigger.
That's right. Okay, now this one was interesting. It took me a while to read through all these.
Yes.
But what would you like to see in FreeBSD? Well, Adrian Chad asked that question, foolish man, on Reddit, right? Does that mean you're volunteering to do all these things, Adrian?
No,
right?
I think he just was.
But anyway,
yes, curious. With FreeBSD 10.2 basically baked, and the line is drawn there for what's going to go in that, it basically becomes time to figure out what else are we going to get done in time for FreeBSD 11. So
that's right. And no, this is actually really good that he did it. I'm just giving you a hard time, Adrian. But no, seriously, there's a lot of comments. This became a very popular topic. We have over 200 comments on this, including a wide range of topics. So we'll cover a few more popular ones here. And if you want to check out the link and read through all of them, which I did, it's very good and fascinating. Go ahead and do that. But one of the top comments, people say things don't just work. So they're citing some examples like failover link aggregation of LACP lags.
Were you having trouble with that?
What was that, Al? I didn't have any trouble with it.
I think someone expanded later on that LACP failover has 2 modes, a faster and a slower one. And I think the default is the slower one, which is probably so it takes 30 seconds to fail over instead of half a second.
Sure.
But
so maybe those are just tuning things. So again, that would still fall under the class of just work.
Exactly.
Maybe it needs to be tuned better.
And I think the other case was people trying to do LACP between their wireless and wired network cards, and that's not what LACP was designed for. So that's that's a different case, basically.
That's right.
So I'd be interesting to see if there actually is a bug there. We can probably get it fixed, because I know, Netflix uses the lag driver with LACP to do failover on their servers with 4 10 gigabit NICs, and I'm sure they want all of them to work. So I'd be surprised if there was actually a problem for the regular use case there. But if it's for a different use case, we'd like to have more detail on what the problem is so that we could look at fixing that.
How my brother just put in his 2 cents. Where's the Bluetooth support? Okay. that may have been on the list. I don't recall seeing that.
That was on the list, but I don't think it was one of the most popular requests.
Okay. But they mentioned also PPPoE issues, maybe some disorganized jail config option, unclear carp config, and userland dtrace being a little bit unstable. So definitely some things that we need to see worked on. Another common one, which I think this does confuse people kind of at first glance at FreeBSD, is that there's 3 firewalls in the base system. What's up with that? We got IP filter and PF kind of being, I don't know, older now in FreeBSD. Should they be removed? Should we put all the focus on IPFW? Or, well, for example, should PF be updated?
IP filter, I can definitely see probably being removed. Yeah, I know it hasn't really got much love lately, and it'd be interesting. Is anybody still using it? And if so, please tell us why.
Yeah. What would be the compelling reason to use that over one of the others? Does it do anything some of the others don't?
Not that I know of.
I don't think any.
No, there's a bunch of people asking about why don't we just remove PF, but recently there's been quite a bit of work on PF to improve a lot of things in FreeBSD. Like I know, forgetting his name now, but a nice Belgian guy it fixed the IPv6 fragment stuff that was not working, and I was. In this thread, I looked at some of the people mentioning specific PRs, and some of them, they had been fixed. Just when somebody fixed the problem, they didn't know the PR was there, and so the PR didn't get marked as closed.
Yeah, sure.
So Christoph, a bunch of the PF ones, I went through and tagged the PRs, and we got those closed because the changes have been committed for a while now, and it'll be hopefully PF will give people fewer problems now.
Well, I have an opinion on this, and since I have a microphone, I guess I will share it. So I guess, the way I look at it is, why don't we just pick one and make it work? So, for example, if a lot of the rage is that PF is outdated compared to OpenBSD's PF, well, rename it. Call it something else. If we're not going to ever claim to be OpenBSD's PF, don't claim to be. Let's just name it something else and move forward. Get rid of IPFW even, and just put one in and make it work and do everything properly.
I think
if the PF,
one of the specific issues with that one was just all the FreeBSD documentation just references you to the OpenBSD documentation, which is different now.
Yeah,
that's definitely a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, let's just rename it, make it our own thing, dock it, and improve it, and it's a fork, and it's gone on and lived its own happy life now. Let's do that. Or if IPFW is truly better or has different things, maybe let's put our resources behind that. I don't know. It just seems like we should be able to figure this out. Maybe a dev summit in the future will bring up this topic, and a decision will be made. That'll be interesting to see.
Maybe I'll just bring up if we come up with a better name for our version of PF at the Cambridge Dev Summit.
So it's clear that this is not the PF or OpenBSD.
It's our PF.
It's and it has its own set of docs and its own syntax, and things work different, and vimage and all that jazz. So anyway, we'll see what comes of that. Of course, one of the other things that came up on this Reddit thread here was video drivers came up pretty frequently, which I can understand why. That's something we've been waiting for a while for in PCBSD land. Users hoping, of course, for better OpenGL support, and just beyond that, even support for newer graphics cards at all from Intel and AMD. So comments were made about some of the wireless chipsets as well.
And Adrian chimed in that him and Rui are working very hard on the Intel 7260 driver, cleaning up the ported. So they ported the OpenBSD one over, and now they're cleaning up and improving it, and getting support for more of the features into it, and getting it hooked into the FreeBSD framework for that. So hopefully we'll have that soon too. Again, kind of a shame that we'll miss the 10.2 window.
Well, one of the things I did see was, I forget, I'm drawing a blank on the name now, Jean Sebastian posted saying that the work that they're going to try and get done around September-ish to get Haswell support in, they may just make a port of it. So you'll have a KMod you can install from the port on 10.2. So
problem solved.
That's at least... problem solved. That means at least you're not left out in the cold if you're on 10.2 for the next 6 months while we wait for 11.0. Hopefully we'll have something end of the summer. But come on, make that happen. I'm excited. We really want some Haswell love. Okay, so some of the other replies, of course, included some stuff about packages, maybe some more clarity with package NG output.
Specifically package NG when a package is getting upgraded and it wasn't the one you asked to upgrade it, a little maybe explanation in brackets why that one is being updated. Sometimes this is being updated because an ABI change or a direct dependency. Well, if it says direct dependency, could you tell me what the dependency is? and stuff. So, or when I install something, why is this other thing getting pulled in? It's like, oh, this is getting pulled in by this package, which is a dependency of that package. It's like,
okay, makes sense. Also, updating PF to match the one in OpenBSD, of course, is something that's come up frequently.
Right. People ask about that a lot, but other than the syntax change, I don't know that there's actually that much that's different, but I don't use PF that much, so I don't know.
Right. Also improved laptop support, which that can mean a whole host of things, from suspend resume to power management, etc. This is an interesting one. Somebody mentioned a graphical installer, which, we kind of do that on PCBSD, but yeah, I can understand. It would be nice to have an official one. LibreSSL in the base. I would be a big fan of that happening at some point.
Actually, what I prefer is that the OpenSSL in base or LibreSSL, whichever one, became a private library, so it's used by Fetch or whatever, but it's not exposed to any program that the user builds. They always have to get Open or LibreSSL from ports. That way, we can just wholesale upgrade the version of whatever SSL in the base system without having to normally we have to stick with a certain version of OpenSSL for all of FreeBSD 10 or for all if we get this change in time, whatever version is the latest OpenSSL when FreeBSD 11 ships in like January or whatever, that would end up being the version for the entire 5 years of FreeBSD 11. Whereas if we made it private, we can update it because we don't have to guarantee that anybody's program linked against it is not going to break during an upgrade.
Sure.
Because, OpenSSL might change.
I would think doing that plus switching to LibreSSL, I think would be cool because I want to cut down on the number of SAs.
Of course,
right?
Yes.
So there's a lot less security advisories, and it seems like the base system utilities that use SSL probably could use LibreSSL pretty easily.
Yeah,
won't be using some of the more open SSL specific
bits.
bits.
I think other than SSH, Fetch.
Yeah.
I don't know what else uses OpenSSL.
I know, right? I think it seems like that would be a low-hanging fruit there. Maybe that's something that'll happen by 11. We'll see.
It might be interesting to see the libSSL implementation change to the Amazon one. For whatever that was called, we talked about the other week.
Okay. Also, some people mentioned more focus on embedded MIPS devices, binary packages with different config options. I know that's come up before, like doing flavors and all those different things.
That one's a little difficult just because the number of possible combinations quickly becomes astronomical. I looked at it for Nginx, and it's like, well, I could make a couple of flavors, like a light, the regular, and a heavy, or mega, or max, or whatever you want to call it. But if I try to do every possible combination, that'd be like 2 to the power of 80, which is a number this long. That would take up more space than I have, and I have 1,000 terabytes of space.
Well, another one interesting, Steam support came up, which that would be related to the Linux emulation, which hopefully that'll happen soon. I heard that's close, but maybe 1 or 2 little bits left. And of course, there was a lot more on the list, so if you want to go read through that, you can. And one user suggested also maybe better marketing for FreeBSD with a little bit more advocacy and hopefully more business adoption, or at least public business adoption.
Yes, like to push that and make that happen more. And
Come
obviously,
on, Sony, admit it already. We know what you're using in the PlayStation. Come on.
And the FreeBSD website could use a little work or a lot of work.
Okay. So, and of course, all you regular users and everyone who's just listening to this, you can help make this happen for whichever ones you're using right now. So maybe you can get involved and contribute and advocate BSD, across the board, at your place of work or just people and kind of push it in the community. And we'll see what comes of all this. So thank you very much, Adrian, for posting that. That actually got a lot of response. So this is really cool. And hopefully some of these things turn into actual things that get done in time for 11 or a future release.
Yes.
Okay, so before we go into the interview, of course, we do want to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean, where you can go sign up with the coupon code FreeBSD Now, and they make it so simple to get set up with a droplet, and it's just a couple things you type in, just, pick a host name, where do you want it to be, and then you sit back and wait, take a sip of your coffee, and it's done. And it boots up, and you can access the console right there in your browser. I did it, I think, this weekend. I set a couple up and kind of kicked them around a little bit. It was a lot of fun. Yeah,
it takes less than a minute to get started, and it just works.
That's right. It just works. So definitely easy. It's easy to upgrade them if you want to go from the $5 a month to the $10 a month, whatever. I did that on one of them too to see how difficult that was. Very simple.
Yep.
I was pleasantly surprised. So yeah, this is definitely a cool thing, and DigitalOcean makes it super simple. So DigitalOcean.com is where you want to go. Sign up, and don't forget that coupon code, because that's $10. That's like a free 2 months on their first tier of a VM, and of course you can put FreeBSD in there. And that's just available right on their menu. Or if you want, we have, gosh, what is it, like 10, 15 episodes back now, we talked about how to do OpenBSD. Man, the weeks fly by.
But because we do
have that info there.
You get a full console into the machine, completely in HTML5, so you don't need Java or any nonsense like that.
Oh, yes.
And you get access to the console of your machine. So if you break it and it can't boot, you can fix it. If you want to do things that you normally wouldn't do, like replace FreeBSD with OpenBSD by, unmounting the swap, writing OpenBSD's flash RD in there, rebooting off of it, and then erasing the FreeBSD with OpenBSD, you can do that.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. So go ahead and get signed up today. And if you talk to those guys, tell them you mentioned it here on BSD Now. Okay, now it's time for our interview, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up on what's going up with this one. We interviewed Ryan, Lortie, and Baptiste when we were at BSD Can, so it was live. Me and Alan were there, and the interview's great. You'll enjoy it, but at the very end of it, you'll hear some weird noises there, and that was when the fire alarms all went off in the building, and they kicked us out. So we wrapped it up. We apologize for the little bit of noise at the end there, but still a fascinating interview, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Well, we're joined now by Ryan and Baptiste, who are here to talk to us a little bit about GNOME and porting over to FreeBSD and some of the stuff that all happens behind the scenes before you guys get to click a button and see it show up as your desktop. So first of all, thank you guys for coming on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So we're all here at BSD Can. It's been fantastic so far. I know you gave a talk earlier, so maybe summarize a little bit of some of your talk for us real quick before we get into in-depth questions.
I guess sort of the quick summary of what happened is about a year ago, maybe a bit more, GNOME in FreeBSD was not in a good state. In ports, it was on GNOME 2 for a very long time. And getting GNOME 3 in was just this huge task that it was basically intractable, it seemed. And I think a big part of that is every time a new release came out, it wouldn't work on FreeBSD because, upstream developers are all running Linux. You write the software, you don't mean to do it, but you do things that are Linux specific. And then when the BSD porters come along and try and get that into FreeBSD, it's not working well.
Sure.
And then, okay, so we have maybe 10 bugs. We got to figure out how this came, when it came, who do I track down to bug about this. Eventually, we hopefully get some fixes in after some long amount of time. People forget even why this is broken. And then 6 months later, a new release comes out, and like there's a whole bunch of new
do it all over again, right?
So it's kind of like, okay, this isn't going anywhere. And on the GNOME side, from a standpoint of glib, which I work on, we sort of had a problem where it was like, okay, we have theoretical support for a lot of platforms that we don't really know what we support. Hey, aches, maybe it works. We got like a patch last year from this guy, and I guess it was working at that point. So maybe it's still working. I don't know. So it was sort of a bad thing from our standpoint because we have code that we don't even know if anybody's still using it. It's like, is this still necessary? Is this a nasty workaround? So I kind of got the idea that it would be really nice if we actually had non-Linux systems that we were regularly building as much of the GNOME stack on as possible. And my goal originally was to get that working for glib, maybe up to GTK. And we have this tool in GNOME called JHBuild, which basically checks GNOME out of Git. So, commits from 5 minutes ago. And builds the latest version of it, along with all the dependencies in order. Lets you run it out of your home directory without trashing your entire system, which is kind of nice.
That is cool.
So I was like, can somebody just like run this on FreeBSD and sort of
I'm sure that was pleasant the first time you're in.
I mean, I was able to run it, and it was good. And, there were problems, and we sort of, at the time I was sort of working through it in the beginning. But the key was that sort of viewing that from the standpoint of being an upstream maintainer of a project, FreeBSD just happened to be the first one that I thought, hey, let's try this with.
Sure.
I was originally thinking, I wanted to get like Solaris working and all the BSDs, and I don't even know, like maybe BIOS and the herd and Minix and who knows, right?
Ambitious, wow.
Well, that's kind of my point. FreeBSD was just like the first thing for me.
Sure.
And I got the idea, I can't do this on my own in the long term. There's no way I can tend to all these builders. I might get it working once, but it's going to decay instantly. So I need to get other people involved in this. And that's kind of when I reached out to the FreeBSD Gnome team.
Okay.
And since then, they really took it over. And they've been doing daily builds at a JH build and really tending to it. And when it breaks, they fix it very quickly. They chase the issue upstream. And that's a great thing. When it breaks and you're doing a build maybe one day after the commit went in that broke it, sometimes even an hour if you get lucky, you can ping the person who just made that commit. It's really obvious. You look at the log, oh, that's the one. You don't have to go digging back through history.
Yeah, so we kind of talked about the same thing of running FreeBSD head and finding problems there. If you wait until the next release, it's like, well, the person who wrote the code that's causing you this trouble finished that 9 months ago and has working on something completely different, has no memory of what was going on.
Can I ask you like a random question about that thing that you wrote last year?
Sure.
It's too late. But when you can, a few hours later or a day later, ping them and be like, yeah, this broke FreeBSD, here's why. And if you only do this, it's fresh in their memory, and they're usually quite happy to hear about it. And that's maybe, there's been some bad perception, I think, of, GNOME people are, they just want Linux all the time and they hate everybody else. I will tell you that there are some people that are ambivalent about non-Linux operating systems, but I don't think there's anybody really who hates the fact that FreeBSD exists. It's just, how do we know? And people make mistakes, and when the patches go upstream, they usually get a very warm reception, usually going quite quickly. And it's been really inspiring to see that. Like, there's this wiki page of, really, there's hundreds at this point of issues that have been fixed, and they've sort of kept track in the wiki of all of the things that have gone up, things that are in progress, and so on.
Good. So I guess you've been in touch with Baptiste a bit. So.
Yeah, I joined like the FreeBSD Gnome IRC channel, and
so where you hang out? Is that where this all
I hang out over there because I want to have somehow Copmast is mostly alone on the GNOME team, and I'm trying to make sure that people are working together between the teams, and also with Upstream and whatever. I was really happy to see Ryan coming into there, so we try to get in touch on what is missing on the FreeBSD part, what we need to get more involved into the Upstream project, so that he knows we are here, he knows what we do provide as a feature, what we do not, and it's a win both sides, so that they don't create a feature which is in Linux only, where we can do something with an abstraction, GLib, for example, because we also have something equivalent. Or in the case we're missing things, or we are bad at something. For example, Ryan has a couple of, let's say, feature requests on KQ and things like this. So it's very important that we get in touch with that. So I was happy to be idling on the GNOME, FreeBSD Gnome at the time.
Yeah, that ended up working out. Well, so speaking of, you guys mentioned, so what are some of the things, maybe barriers to fixing some of this on FreeBSD that makes porting difficult?
Well, one of the key feature, well, we have a couple of things, Ryan will tell better than I do on that, but basically we need KQ64, which is what Apple has already an implementation of that, and so we need to figure out one of the developers to work on that. I don't want to be that one, but I'm trying to harass people until we find someone to do it. It's kind of important, Ryan will explain why. And there is also a couple of missing parts where we don't have a very good file system monitoring system, so we need to push into that direction. It's needed for GNOME, but not only. There is a lot of upstream or downstream users that really want to have this kind of feature.
Something like iNotify, you mean?
Something like iNotify or the Apple FS7.
FS7 too.
So we need to provide something, and because we'll be probably, we're latecomer to this, we need to provide something which is quite compatible with existing systems that either iNotify or FS7, but so that the upstream doesn't have much work to do. And there is also all the the requirement they may have that right now systemd is doing for them. And so the thing is understand what it's bringing to them. Do we have this kind of thing, and what can you do to have this either implement bits of systemd and or write some features that systemd provide into our mechanism, or show them that we have something else and maybe they can deal with it. I don't know.
Have you seen that port that OpenBSD did for systemd? The shim that
I work on it, and I sent a patch. I sent a couple of patches for this to be buildable on FreeBSD.
Oh, fantastic!
The thing is, well, I did that at the beginning. I know the Antoine Jacuto, which is you had him in interview recently, and so the OpenBSD GNOME maintainer. By the way, he's also now working on the FreeBSD Gnome channel, so we can discuss with Ryan. And so when he has his summer of code, I contacted him, telling, okay, you're going to do that. This is interesting for us. Do you want? Maybe it's him contacting him. I don't remember how we did contact each other, but the idea was that they will do it for OpenBSD because that was the goal, but trying to keep in mind that it should be portable to other systems. Problem is, I think the students get very, very busy since the product quite stalled. So
what happens.
I might somehow grab it and try to figure out people to work on it.
Okay.
I won't do it myself. I can drive people, but I have too many things to do. So driving is okay. Doing, not really sure.
Sure.
I guess from my standpoint, just in terms of these other implementations of like systemd things, the way I sort of look at that is, we have POSIX, and that's good. But POSIX is pretty small when you think about what it specifies, and there's a lot of stuff missing from it. And if we're building something like GNOME, standards are great, but if you don't have something that's covered by a relevant standard, you basically have to go your own way on that and make your own. And a lot of that work has been done by systemd. In terms of what we had to do in order to do really basic things on the system before, we wrote our own code that was really poorly maintained and full of if-defs by like which distribution you were on, or it had this different backend for BSD. And again, that kind of code I told you where we're not even sure if some of it's needed anymore. And, bonus points, it's all running as root because it's, doing things like, changing the time zone or whatever. And now we could just get rid of this stuff and use the APIs that systemd provides, or things for session management through lognd. These are things we really need. And a lot of those services provided by systemd are done in a relatively neutral way, ways that you could easily re-implement them, and the APIs are well documented on the Free Desktop Wiki, and the APIs are done in such a way that it is easy to re-implement them without tying into systemd for the most part. Lognd's
a little trickier.
Yeah, it's a little trickier. But even then, it's not impossible. And a lot of that is the client-side library, because for the most part, if you're interacting with the client-side library, it's just reading text files out of a shared memory file system, which is how sort of the reader side of it is so quick. You don't have to wait for a dbus call to another service. And from our standpoint, we want to use these APIs because they do useful things for us. And we can't not use them because we need them to do things that GNOME needs to do. So they need to exist and we need to use them. But we're not really interested in depending on systemd as a specific piece of software. We just need the APIs. So our best case scenario is that the BSDs come along and provide an alternate implementation of these APIs. And ideally, it's compatible on the API level. So from where I'm sitting, that would make me really, really happy. The other thing is, you provide something that's as close as possible. Maybe it's a bit different. And then I need to start like putting if-defs in my code. That's not great. I would prefer not to do that. But if that's necessary, that's sort of a second option that is decidedly less preferable.
Okay. Any other question? You mentioned something about KDBus. What's the question? So we can ask it.
Well, he's involved as well on KDBus, so
what should I ask him? That's a good question.
Well, what is KDBus first, for example, where it's going, and we are also looking at it to know what it is, because we'll have ones to be compatible at least, or provide it, and it has kind of feature that we may need for other things. So it might not at the beginning have been KDBus for us, but given KDBus is going, maybe we can share things.
Right.
So maybe you can talk a bit about what is KDBus, how it works, and how it will impact the future if it's managed to get implemented.
So basically, I guess most people have heard, at least there's this thing that exists called DBus. And it's an inter-process communication system. And it's basically, the main thing it does is remote procedure calls. I have a service and then some application that wants to make use of whatever service this is. So it sends it a method call and says, please do this thing, and it gets a reply. And part of that is it has like a serialization system for encoding the arguments in the message call and all that stuff. And right now, the way this is implemented is there's a system daemon. In fact, there's two of them. You have one running at the system level, implementing the system bus, and then in each user session, there's one called the session bus. And this is a separate process, and everything connects over a Unix socket to this process, and services and clients alike. I mean, any given process, when it connects to DBus as a client of DBus, can function as a DBus service and client on its own. So, you know, maybe an application will want to send a message to the service. What it's really doing is it's sending a message to DBus saying, can you ask that service to do something? And then it asks the service, and then it goes back with the message reply back through the bus daemon to the originating application. That's 4 context switches, a lot of copying of data. And because of the way the DBus spec was written, the daemon is required to validate that that data is correct. So you're copying a lot, you're doing a lot of validation passes on the data. It's generally kind of slow, and the context switches don't help as well. So the idea of KDBus is to take out this daemon process and turn the kernel itself into the message writing mechanism. And also to remove a lot of the validation passes by just passing around a blob. So essentially the thing that receives it becomes responsible for deciding if it's valid. So one sender and it gets received. And that's the only person who has to care about it being valid. A big part of that is something that has already gone into the Linux kernel called memfd. When we're sending particularly large messages, which is something we want to be able to do with KDBus, you know, if I want to send like a gigabyte to somebody, we don't want to do any copying on that if possible. So we can allocate a memory buffer and fill that up on the sender. And we get an FD that represents that memory buffer. And we can send that across KDBus as one of the things we send, as if it were a part of the message. So it's not that we're sending a file descriptor and you receive it on the other end and have to mmap that and all that. It's rather that it's a key feature of the serialization format itself that, you know, and maybe even I send a method call that has several arguments, one of which is, you know, this giant file and some other stuff. And it all just kind of mixes in, and when you pull it out the other side, it all gets handled quite transparently. So that's sort of one of the nicer features of it. But that's something we were talking about as well. It might be a good step to get into FreeBSD, because in order to do this memfd thing, which is what we call it, we have this concept called sealing. And it's a promise from the sender that they will not modify the content after they've sent it. Which you can't do with normal shared memory, because, I mean, you have write access to it. And you can continue to write to it even after you sent it. So one thing we can do now, which is a new feature in Linux, is we can fill this thing up and then seal it. Now it's immutable, and the kernel will attest to the fact that it's immutable. So when the person receives it, they can ask the kernel, is this immutable? Is it going to be messed around with behind my back? And the kernel will say, no, it's immutable now. You can trust that this is really read-only. And that's something that doesn't exist in any form in BSD. And that's really a key part of KDBus. But generally, the main part of KDBus, memfd is in, but the main part of KDBus has yet to go in the Linux kernel. It's sort of a funny thing. This has been attempted a number of times to get dbus in the Linux kernel.
I've heard.
And there have been a lot of attempts over time, and all of the previous ones have gone poorly, and everyone was thinking, you know, this time would be different.
This time, we did it right.
We have really like a good team behind it, and It's kind of going a little bit rough right now. I think everybody kind of hoped it would be already, and it's not. And we're still sort of seeing what's going on with that. There's been a lot of discussion on the Linux kernel mailing list, and a lot of sort of nitpicking on details. And I mean, even I'm not totally happy with a lot of the design decisions that were taken in KD Bus. But it would sure be nice if, you know, this happened eventually, even if it's not perfect, you know, can we get something going on? And then I guess that that comes to sort of the point where it would be also cool if we could get this on the BSDs. But it's sort of an interesting situation because, again, from my standpoint, I would like to have one API that I write to. The interaction that glib, for example, would have with KDBus is it's a lot of surface area. It's a thorny interaction. Sure, okay, send and receive messages, but the way that you serialize those messages into the kernel and, you know, interact with memfds and put those in the message, and lots of things about how you check the credentials of the person you're talking to, and there's really a lot of details to this API. And it would be cool if FreeBSD implemented something like KDBus, but if it's only something like KDBus, then I have to write all of that surface area twice. So, you know, it might be interesting if BSD people were to get involved in the discussion at this point, even, and sort of look at what's going on the Linux side and say, is this an API we could deal with implementing? And if not, I mean, what's our problem with it? Maybe that would even improve the design in Linux. And in general, I sort of wish people were doing more of this in the BSD world, and not necessarily working on stuff from Linux, but even when we make APIs in GNOME, for example, we're all running Linux. I'm not going to say everybody, but everybody working on GNOME is running a Linux system. And when we make our APIs there, we do it from a Linux-centric kind of way. I mean, in glib and GTK, we have to worry, okay, this has got to work on Mac, this has got to work on Windows, so we sort of try and do an abstraction that we think is going to work there. But a lot of the time, the way we proceed is we get it working on Linux, and hopefully somebody shows up at some point with patches to make it work on Windows. And hopefully we were smart enough when we made the abstraction that we didn't do something that prevents them from doing that. But there's not a lot of BSD people involved at that phase of the design process, and it would be really good if there were more.
Like earlier in the API design process and stuff like that.
Yeah, instead of just coming along after the fact and doing a port, it would be good to have people involved upstream in earlier stages.
And even for us, so that we don't have to suffer an API or an ABI which is really not designed to fit with the way FreeBSD is doing things. If we're getting it evolved at the beginning of the design, then we can influence and we can have something that benefits everywhere, because we know already that we will have to be compatible somehow with, if KDBus happen, then application will use it. So when building desktops or using other applications, we'll have to deal with the compatibility somehow with KDBus. And also we were speaking for a while into having this kind of IPC into the kernel for other reasons. So we are also looking for the same kind of mechanism for different reasons. So there is another one, another operating system trying to do the same. Why not just discussing together and say, okay, you want to do that, we want to do that. Basically, we have the same need. We probably have some needs we don't, and vice versa. But still, we can talk together and make something that makes everyone as happy as possible.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we should wrap up. Fire alarms. Yeah, I got you crazy in here. So thank you guys so much for being on the show. We appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. And again, the fire alarm just adds to the whole excitement of the thing, right? It gives it that real live flavor. So anyway, apologize for the noise there, but hey, stuff happens when you're on location, you know, it's all good. But anyway, it's time to get into the news roundup. But before we do, really quick, we do want to mention another sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems. And of course, the usual suspects here for the URL is ixsystems.com/BSD Now, where you can go and talk to these guys and, of course, let them know that we sent you. But we got a couple different things to show you here this week, Alan. So why don't you tell us
first, they have a new blog post that outlines how data integrity works with ZFS. And they have some great diagrams in here. So they talk about, you know, solving the problem of the write hole in old-fashioned RAID controllers, It's funny to call the state-of-the-art RAID old-fashioned because it's not as good as ZFS. But how that RAID 5 write hole can actually also happen to your RAID 1 mirrors, which some people didn't know. And then they explain how that happens, and they have these diagrams showing how, when one block down here changes, it actually trickles all the way back up the tree. And because of the checksums, basically, if the new block, because you don't overwrite the block, you write it to a new place and then update the index. If your power goes out in the middle of that operation or something and it doesn't complete properly, when the system boots back up, it tries to load that newer version, but the checksum doesn't match, or it's otherwise doesn't work. So it's like, okay, I'm going to step back one transaction group and get the good version of that file for you. Whereas with the regular file system, you would have overwritten the good version of the file, so now you have nothing. You have the broken version, and that's it. Whereas with ZFS, if the new version didn't complete all the way, you at least get the original version back instead of nothing.
You only lose the most recent write, not the entire block.
Yeah. And then, you regular approaches of, battery-backed caches or supercapacitors and UPSs and whatever ensure that you just don't have that problem at all. But, knowing that no matter what, you're always going to have a usable system, that makes it much easier to sleep at night.
That's right. That's right. Well, if IX pays this much attention to this kind of stuff and writes up cool articles about it, I guess they know a little bit about storage then. Well, do you have a picture to show us
also,
here, Alan, of another satisfied customer?
Yes, a fan of the show wrote in and just got his IX Systems box that he's going to put SmartOS on. So I just thought it was cool somebody to send in a picture of their latest gear. I will have to do quite a few pictures when I get my gear. Once I figure out how to
we like seeing
lift
pictures like that. Send more in. That is very cool. But hey, that could be your hand in your box showing up next time. So make sure you go to ixsystems.com and order your next system from there, and let those guys just tweak it out exactly the way you need. Okay, so first up, we have some news roundup information here, and another new utility. Wow, OpenBSD is just hitting us with all kinds of new cool stuff. But next up, we have ResFlash. So if you've not heard of ResFlash before, it's a tool for building OpenBSD images for embedded and cloud environments in a more programmatic, reproducible way. And of course, one of the major benefits to having an image like this is that you're using a read-only file system. So you don't have any possibility at all of file system corruption if the power is lost, which we do have a lot of power outages where I live because we have a lot of thunderstorms and whatnot. I think last week we had all the servers go out like 4 times in one night because some big storm blew out. And speaking of which, ZFS saved my butt there because we had a file get corrupt on one of the web servers. So just rolled that back to the night before. But anyway, that's why it's important in this case you're using a read-only file system here, because if power loss is a real thing for where you live, then this is going to save your
you want to make sure, when you're booting off flash media like a USB drive or SD cards or compact flash cards, that you're not writing to it all the time because you're going to wear the device out and then it's dead. So making sure you don't do that. But also, it says it draws inspiration from NanoBSD. So the idea is that you actually have 2 firmware images on there. So when you upgrade, you install the new version over top of the oldest image, so that if that one doesn't work, when it fails to boot, you can flip back to how your system was before you did the update. But if it does work, then you switch to using that, and next time you upgrade, you overwrite the oldest one.
That's right. That's right. But of course, you may need some rewritable data, right? So it does have support for a read-write partition as well. So if you do need to keep any persistent changes, you can do that. And we have links here to the source code, which is conveniently located on GitHub. And you can take a look at that under ResFlash, B. Conway ResFlash, and read the main site for more information on how you could use that.
Yeah, and so it has, configs are actually stored in /CFG and then mounted to etc. During boot up, but there's also a manual command to just sync the changes you've made to etc back to that CFG partition, and it's also done automatically at shutdown, so no more accidentally erasing your configs on reboot.
Nice. Okay, well, next up we have some jails talk here with IOCage. So a neat article somebody wrote here about the growing number of FreeBSD jail management utilities. Of course, there's quite a few of them out there now. We got EasyJail, CBSD, Warden, and a few others. Although Warden's going to be going away now, folks. In case you haven't heard, we're replacing that with IOCage, which is a perfect segue into this article here. But if you're looking at all the different choices, the author of this blog post did take a look at all those and eventually settled on IOCage for the job that he needed done. And the post he wrote here walks you through some of the basic configuration and usage of IOCage for creating and managing your jails, which is very cool. And I've been happy to work a little bit on IOCage with the IOCage developers. Nice. And it uses ZFS properties for everything, which is just really slick.
It means if you replicate a jail, it's already set up on the other side.
Yeah, it's got all the config with it. You didn't have to remember, I got to grab that conf file or grab the stuff out of rc.conf or whatever. It just got sent. So very cool. But if you've been unhappy with EasyJail or any of the others, or you're looking for something new to try, IOCage may be worth giving a try instead, since it does have really good integration with ZFS. And I mean, it just needs ZFS. It's ZFS, which is very cool. One of the things that I really thought it has over Warden, for example, was Warden was written back in UFS, and then ZFS got bolted on later, and just all these ifs. If you're on one, do this. If on another, do this. It got really yucky really fast. So this is just an awesome, clean ZFS implementation.
Yep. Also, it takes advantage of the RCTL and our limit or whatever. That So these were resource control features for the amount of CPU, RAM, and so on that were introduced a while ago, but they were off by default, and so nobody ever had them. Recently, they've been tweaked a little bit so that it's compiled into the kernel by default, but just switched off with a sysctl. So by just setting that sysctl, you now have access to those features, and IOCage can use them. So it doesn't require a custom kernel anymore, which makes those features much more accessible. As more people start using them, they will maybe get even improved further. The RAM limiting works very well, and most of the other limiting. The CPU limiting doesn't work as smoothly as it would like. Basically, you can use up, if you set it to, you're allowed to have this much CPU, it can use all that up in the first couple of fractions of the second, and then it's starved until the beginning of the next second when it can have that amount again. And so it can make it kind of bursty. And maybe we can level that out to make a little bit smoother performance when you are trying to use more CPU than you're allowed to.
Okay. Well, next up, we have a Dragonfly, and it looks like, man, these guys just don't slow down on the GPU improvements. But this time, it looks like Intel Valley View was what they got working, and we had a post here from Matthew Dillon saying that after a 2-day marathon, we tracked down the issues that were preventing Valley View GPUs, which are primarily in modern Atoms, from working properly in Dragonfly, and that update's now in master. And Francois is also another iterative DRM update from Linux under test in the Git tree, and we have the link to that here in the post. And the current iteration there is DRM i915 Linux 3 16v6 branch, and it supports full Broadwell support with acceleration. Gosh, lots of cool stuff there. And they said he said also that the update we folded into master as soon as they fixed an issue with KVM console support. That it broke doesn't prevent you from running X, though. So if you still want to just run it with X, that's cool. And that also fixed some memory corruption and HDA sound driver interrupt issues as well. So, man, lots of cool stuff happening there. It's a good job, Dragonfly guys. But yeah, it makes me jealous every time I have to talk about that. But anyway, that's really cool. Okay, and last up in the roundup here, we have Ted Eubanks wrote a new blog post talking about development, specifically branchless development. And before you freak out, you should take a listen to what some of his stuff he talks about here is. But he covers the effects pretty much of having or versus not having them. He covers integrating and merging code and the versioning problems that can happen with multiple people, of course, contributing at once, which every project deals with this. And one of the cool quotes here, he says, for an open source project, branching is counterintuitive and counterintuitively antisocial. For instance, I usually tell people I'm running OpenBSD, but that's actually kind of a lie. What I'm running is TEDUBSD, which is like OpenBSD, but has some changes to make it even better. Of course, you can't have TEDUBSD because I'm selfish, and I'm also lazy and only inclined to only make my changes work for me and not everyone else. Of course, it's all in his own branch. That's what he's referring to. So he said the solution, according to him, is bring all the code to the developers are using closer together. And one big benefit, of course, is that all work in progress code gets tested much faster and bugs get fixed early on. Because if you break it there, you probably broke it for everyone.
Yeah,
somebody will tag you and get it fixed.
That's the thing is, in FreeBSD, all development does actually happen in head. Sometimes when a vendor or something will work on something, they might try to, build it on 10 and get it working and then try to forward port it to 11, but they'll run into problems and will quickly learn their lesson that, yes, all new work happens in the head of the repo and then gets merged into the branches for the releases. I think there might be some issues with scale there, like committing work in progress stuff into head is not always quite encouraged, because if you break head, well, that's broken for everybody who's also trying to do work. And with 400 developers, that can happen more often than with fewer developers. And yeah, yes, I wish that more stuff went in faster and got tested and iterated faster and more work happened. But at the same time, head being broken more often does not entice me either, because I like to actually run that on servers to get those features that are working now. And it's like, we almost need another branch, but no, that's bad. Don't do that.
I know. Don't do that. Well, I got to read the couple sentences here because I thought this was really clever. He says, the problem with branching is really merging. So what's merging? It's the worst. Any discussion of merging trouble soon turns to merge conflicts, because merge conflicts are death. But there are fates worse than death. There's actually successful merges, for example. So, yeah, definitely cool. And if that intrigues you, you should go read the rest of the article, because he explains what he's talking about here and why slow is fast, fast is slow, and everything maybe makes sense if you do a branchless development.
It's interesting.
But, yeah, definitely very interesting. I read through this one a couple times. It's not a super long article, but it's
yes, the interesting one is slow is fast. It certainly sounds like forcing everyone to play in the same sandbox will slow things down, and it does. But it also speeds things up. And I think that was the point I was just trying to make with, if more people got their stuff into FreeBSD head sooner instead of sitting in their own branch until it was more polished before going in, we'd probably spot a lot of the problems sooner. But at the same time, it might make doing some other work harder, because, I can't finish my work until we fix your problem, and then it's just you offloading your problems onto everybody else.
Well, one big one I'd say is good to push into head sooner rather than later for any of the BSDs is new drivers. So you're not breaking anything old necessarily a lot of times. You're just putting a new driver in. It may not work perfectly or properly for all variations of those devices, but at least people can now start trying it and testing it, and you get the feedback much quicker. Hopefully it'll motivate you then to finish the driver and get things done.
But, like many saying, features never get trapped in the next branch. I can definitely see that, if everybody just ran FreeBSD 11, we wouldn't have to worry about, is that going to be done in time for 10.2? But also, not all people like to upgrade. There are a lot of people that are very happy about the fact that, they can just do minor updates over a course of 5 years without having to deal with incompatibilities and things being removed and so on. And yeah, it's hard to satisfy everybody.
Right. Well, interesting article,
Yes.
interesting concepts there, and definitely should inspire some discussion.
Exactly.
So I think you guys enjoyed as much as I did reading it.
There's a lot we could learn there.
Okay, time for feedback and questions. But of course, before we do that, we got to sneak this other ad in here, you guys. We got Tarsnap we still got to mention today, which is going to be at tarsnap.com/BSD Now, where you can go there. Come on, that's a short URL, real easy to remember. Go type that in. If you're driving in the car, just remember to do that when you get to the office or get back home. And get yourself signed up with backups over at Tarsnap, where you can put a couple bucks in, and that may last you quite a while, depending on the amount of data you're backing up. Come on, it's measured in pico dollars. I mean, come on. Yeah, it's cheap.
I've been running twice daily backups since January 1st, and I still have not managed to spend $1.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, at that price, there's no reason not to. And then the added benefit of having it fully encrypted.
Yes.
Fully encrypted, deduplicated, and encrypted the right way, where you're not having to trust that the remote end says the disks are encrypted. And we promise we won't share the keys with anybody. Oh, no, it's encrypted on your end, and you're the only one with the key. So they have no access to your data on the remote side. It's just gibberish to them unless you decide to give your key out. I mean, as secure as you are with that key is how secure your backups are going to be.
I had to be very careful because what I'm backing up is my keys for everything else.
I think a lot of us are doing that, right? But yeah, it's definitely a very secure way to store your data offsite. This is where I store my stuff in case the house burns down or something, right? And I need keys. I need these to build things and whatnot. So all the important bits and business bits and all that. But Tarsnap makes that super simple. And again, they have clients for just about anything under the sun. So there's no reason not to get signed up today and start doing your backups that way. Okay, first up we have this week Matthew writing in.
ZFS question.
And ZFS, of course. We get a lot of these for some reason.
Probably because it's one of the most interesting things that's happening.
I know, right?
I'll take this one if you want.
He says, oh yeah,
so he says, hey guys, first let me say thanks that I love the show and appreciate all the hard work and love listening to you guys. I'm working on a new FreeBSD ZFS storage box, and I have a question regarding the use of mirrored versus not mirrored slog or separate log ZIL device. In the past, it was recommended to always mirror the slog device in case the hardware failed. Now there's conflicting information floating around that says that it's no longer necessary. From what I understand, the purpose of the slog is to speed up synchronous writes to the pool by giving ZFS a fast place, usually the SSD, that's non-volatile to write the synchronous writes to instead of having to finish the transaction group and flush that out. So it writes to the slog, and then those get flushed out at the regular end of the transaction group instead. So this is linear block storage for the transaction group before acting the sync write. So this way, when you do a synchronous write, you get a response as soon as it's on the SSD instead of having to wait for the slower hard drives. He said, I believe the transaction groups are still held in RAM, and when it comes time to flush the data to the pool, it's done from RAM. The slog is simply a replay backup in case of the power failure. He says, in this case, would ZFS be able to sustain an slog hardware failure since the transaction group are still in RAM? If so, would a pool allocated ZIL, the default when you don't have an slog, take over and be used for future sync writes until the slog is replaced? I think that's the case, and specifically, oftentimes the reason why people mirror the slog still isn't because the pool would break without it. It's because they depend on the performance. So if the performance goes down because the slog fails, then their database server now can't keep up with the load. So they mirror it just for the sake of not losing it because it's required for performance. Some people, traditionally the best practice was always you don't mirror your L2 arc, your read cache, because the data is not important. If it goes away, it's fine. But if you depend on the performance, you actually do want to mirror your read cache so that if one of the drives dies, you can still read really quickly, because if not, all of a sudden your pool can't perform as fast as it needs to. And if your virtual machines are depending on that, all of a sudden every virtual machine is so slow it might as well be down. That maybe is worse than it actually being down, where it might fail over. So I'm not sure that it would perform flawlessly if it died, but I do know that it's more resilient than it used to be. But in general, if you have an slog because you need the performance, you probably want to mirror it because you need the performance either way.
Yeah, you don't want that to go away. Okay. Ready for the next one? Good deal. All right, next up we have Chris, who writes in, and hey, what do you know? It's about ZFS. He said, hey guys, I love the show. Thank you for putting it together. I have no idea how you guys find the time. Well, we got to give TJ a lot of credit for that, too. He does a lot of work putting these show notes together and kind of aggregating everything in one place so we can do this show. So thank you again, TJ. He says, I know the time and work commitment you put in each week must be extraordinary. You recently described a ZFS backup strategy in which mirrored sets are rotated in and out of a pool, kind of like a tape backup. He said, I have some questions about these hot swapping backup approaches. When an old set is brought back online, does it undergo a full resilver?
The way Matt Aarons described it to me is most times it wouldn't. It would just catch up on what it missed. It depends how old it is. If it's too old, then it might have to be fully resilvered. But in general, the way it was described to me is it would just catch up on what it's missed. It would know, I have up to this transaction group in this pool, so I just have to grab everything since then and go forward.
Okay. And he said, can you comment on Jordan Hubbard's implication that hot swapping hard drives damages their electronics?
Well, obviously, if you're doing it a lot, then that definitely would probably be a concern. So yes, this strategy of doing it every week might be more than it's designed for. I think if you read the specs on the drive, some of them actually have, it's designed to be able to handle 40 hot swaps over its lifetime. So maybe it's not the best idea in that case. So he relays this question into, if after unmounting the file system, what more should I do before hot unplugging the drive? So maybe let the drive actually be shut down as much as you can before you do it. If you're completely if you're doing my mirror strategy, you wouldn't actually be taking the file system offline, right? You would have a 3 or more deep mirror, and you'd be pulling one of the disks out. So just ZFS offline would stop that disk from being used anymore. And then you would have to, there's probably a cam control command to put the drive to sleep, so it actually powers off, which might make it, less likely that the power failure would cause the head to smash into something or something. And then he says, how do I guarantee that each drive in the mirror set was offline at the same instant? You don't have to do that, because ZFS's transaction groups, it will just catch up. If one of the drives in the sets is slightly further ahead, it should just be able to catch up. I don't know. I guess the implication of that is, what do you do when you're trying to recover from just those one set of disks from the pool? I think it'll automatically just go to the transaction group that every disk has.
Okay. Cool. Next up, we have an EasyJail question from Anonymous. He says, hey, I just went over your EasyJail tutorial. He said, great. He said, couple questions, though. You talked about Linux jails. Are those for EasyJail or for Wharton? It wasn't quite clear. He said, when I ran EasyJail admin create BSDNow.tv, etc., etc., he said, I noticed in ifconfig it has a /32 netmask. My server has a /27. Should my EasyJail netmask also be a /27, or is a /32 because it's using this host IP as a router? In the former case, how do I configure the netmask for a jail?
Okay, so specifically, the way ifconfig works in FreeBSD, you can only have one IP in each subnet that has the real subnet mask. If you have two, then you actually end up with 2 different routes into that subnet, and the routing doesn't know how to handle it. So alias IPs, which are the second or more IP in the same subnet, are always /32, and that's why EasyJail does that.
Okay. He said, out of box, does EasyJail have no firewall? If not, can I run PF on the jail while running IPFW on the host?
If you're not using vimage, there is no firewall in the jail, but you can apply the firewall rules on the host like normal. If you're using vimage, then you can use a separate firewall inside each jail. But I'd recommend IPFW over PF, because I think there are still some outstanding issues where PF will crash the machine. Mostly now when you shut down the jails. But yeah. And
okay. He said, lastly, if my host is booting into a ZFS pool, if I'm not setting EasyJail use ZFS, then is the jail sharing the host file system?
The jail always does. The difference, when you have EasyJail use ZFS, it will make a separate ZFS data set for each of its different things, like the base jail and each of the jails. If you don't have EasyJail use ZFS, it will just write them all as regular directories on top of the file system, whether it's ZFS or not. So normally you want it just because it makes it easier to do snapshots and clones and so on. But EasyJail has separate settings for whether or not you want the base jail and everything to be data sets or not, and then another one that controls whether you want each jail to have its own data set. But you probably do want those just because it means you can replicate them separately, you can snapshot them separately, you can roll one jail back without touching the others and all that kind of stuff. And you can also easily clone a jail, which is an interesting thing to do.
All right. Next up, we have Bill, who writes in. He has a question about non-x86 CPUs. He says, hi, my name's Bill. I am a 25-year-old radio technician in Sisseton in Minnesota. I've been a BSD advocate since high school, and I'm getting more involved in the BSD community all the time. I have to say that I love the show, never miss it, and it's definitely great to have this resource available. Well, thank you, Bill. He said, I'm one of probably a few users of FreeBSD and OpenBSD on multiple platforms left, and when I hear you guys talking about that QMake issue on PowerPC, which I was following in the FreeBSD PPC mailing list, I thought I'd share some of my experiences with BSD on some of the lesser used platforms. He said, I manage a fair number of systems. Most of them are running on 64-bit Intel, but I probably have more SPARC 64 and PowerPCs running now than on i386. I have made it a bit of speciality of mine to make use of BSD on existing equipment owned by a customer in a Solaris or OSX system or shop or some other older Unix environment and migrating their special sauce to run on it. Or so it could be as simple as setting up a Samba server on an existing G5 Mac that they own, for example. He said there's a lot of old Sunfire servers running Solaris out there that will take years to die, and there are a lot of companies that aren't excited about buying a lot of new hardware and porting their code over to Linux. Thank goodness. He said when I start to run into software support and management issues, I found BSD to be a relatively easy sell. They get an up-to-date modern OS with modern ports available, and usually migrating their C code or Perl isn't much of an issue. They get to hold off on buying new hardware until there's a direct need, which, of course, accounting really loves this. He said, the advantage for me is that when these companies start looking at new hardware with the latest Xeon, they're already running FreeBSD 9.3 or 10.1. Their code is already ported. The software they're now using is already available and works. And when they move, it's basically just a recompile and it's good to go. These customers stick to BSD and forget about Linux or paying Oracle more money. Everything just works and they couldn't be happier.
I think that's one of the insidious ways you can get BSD into everything.
That's right. That's really smart. He said, I've always been interested in the older and more unusual hardware. It's a big part of how I found a niche in supporting on a professional level. Personally, I run a Spark 64 server, a PowerPC G5X serve, an alpha-based DS20L running OpenBSD, an old 68K Mac running NetBSD, partly for fun and partly to make sure I can support my clients. Although he says, okay, really, the 68K Mac is purely for fun. He said, I found a lot of value and support for older platforms for getting my foot in the door with a lot of customers. Yes, Spark 64 isn't the future, but I still think it's very much the present. It's not dead yet. There are a lot of users of this old gear out there, and if you know where to look. For a company that's never heard of BSD to adopt it because it will extend the life of their hardware, I think is a very powerful thing. I'm glad to see you guys reporting on the QMake issue because I think we should strive to keep more ports building on older platforms and not give up on it because it's tier 2 yet. If QMake works on PPC, we might get 1 or 2 more BSD users out there.
Yeah.
Well, cool, Bill. I hope somebody did fix that indeed on PPC, and then you guys can have Lumina and all the latest Qt ports.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear the use cases for that older hardware because I remember hearing the original story of NetBSD was we have all these mainframes that they don't make software for anymore, and we'd like to keep using them. It's like, oh, NetBSD, it runs on everything.
That's right.
And seeing FreeBSD getting to do that, and for some of the older hardware where your choices are keep paying for Solaris or throw the hardware away. It's definitely interesting to see some of those use cases.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for writing that in. I'm sure there's a lot more folks like that out there who are doing the same thing and sneakily getting BSD on that older hardware there. So keep up the good work, folks, and keep those branches alive. So, of course, as we close up today, we want to mention there was a ton of links in today's news. We had all kinds of mailing list posts, wiki pages, discussions, source code commits, and more, a lot more than usual. So if you want to see all those, because you're not going to remember just from hearing us talk about it, go to bsdnow.tv and grab your show notes, and you can just click on everything right there. Also, send your questions, comments, or if you have any other ideas or topics or stories you want mentioned on the show, send that to feedback@bsdnow.tv. We would appreciate that, and we'll try and make sure it gets into a future episode.
Yes, and we're always looking for more interviews. We need more interviews. Please come be interviewed. So
that's right.
If you're doing anything interesting with BSD or have ever done anything interesting with BSD, we'd love to talk to you about it. So please get in touch with us, and we will schedule a time for you. Or also feel free to volunteer someone. That would be good too.
Just email us and CC them and be like, okay, you're now scheduled, and just work out the details, and we'll make that happen.
And a reminder that EuroBSDCon 2015 registration is now officially open, and VBSDCon registration is open as well. So get registered for your conferences and show up. Look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, we'll look forward to getting to meet you guys in person. So definitely come on out. I know I just got all booked up for VBSDCon. So excited to go out to that, and I think you're all ready to go to Euro, Alan. Okay, and you're going to Cambridge too, right? There's Dev Summit.
Cambridge in August, VBSDCon in September, and EuroBSDCon in October.
Yeah, I'll be at Texas Linux Fest. So if that's closer to you guys, come on out to Texas Linux Fest. I think that's in San Marcos. And then VBSDCon, of course, Ohio Linux Fest as well. So that may be a good one to meet some of you folks as well. So look forward to doing that. And we appreciate you guys watching the show. And, of course, we'll be back same time next week for our 100th episode. So you got to check that out.
See you next week.